And these two maps down here are the amount of hardscape, or the walkways and paved surfaces in the park. So you have a picture of before and afterwards. The amount of pavement is going to increase from 25% to a third of the park. And you can see that, just to orient you a little, here's Main Street, College Street, and St. Paul, and these big gray blocks are City Hall, BCA, and Rerun. So you can see that two of these paths are being widened and moved down a little bit. And when you look up here, you can see, oh, those three paths are right, those three trees are right where they want to relocate the path, and these 4 trees are in the way over here. So there's 7 trees that have to be cut because they want to move the paths and widen them. And then this big green grassy area here, which is right out the back door of Burlington City Arts, they want to pave this big triangle. And that is this triangle right here. And it's, so how many people here have gone to a lunchtime concert in the summertime? So that's the place where they normally have the concerts, right out the back door of the firehouse. There's a big grassy triangle there, and they want to cut down all of those trees to increase the amount of space for vendors and for performance area. So there are good things about the plan that could be implemented without having to increase the pavement and therefore have to cut down so many trees. So we know that the park needs work. We want to see work be done to the park. It's in a pretty sorry shape. It's been neglected. And we've been asking right along for them to take care of these trees. And the grass. So I emailed the city arborist and asked when the last time the grass was aerated, and he couldn't find any record of the last time the grass was aerated. Although, anyways, he couldn't find a record. So they haven't been doing what they could be doing to take care of the park. And we're sad about that. It's a maintenance issue. We don't have to spend $4 million. We can spend maintenance money to repair, maintain, and improve the park. So the other thing I want you to know is we've gone around to all of the NPAs doing our presentation, asking the NPAs to take a formal vote. Folks that say, oh, let's keep the park green, they're just a small vocal minority. And we don't really know if that's true or not until we take a vote. And so we've collected the required number of signatures. We have yet to turn them all in. We just turned in a batch this week, and we'll be turning some more in after the holidays. The city employees said that they were really busy for the holidays, so we held some back for that reason. But right after the holidays, we'll be turning the last batch in. We have more than enough. The city council, because it's advisory, they get, even if we collect on the ballot. And that's why we're going to the NPAs. Every NPA that has taken a vote has voted to put it on the ballot. And so I just question, how much power do these NPAs have? Is this just a waste of time? Or, I don't know, I hope that's not true. So the city council gets to vote on it. The mayor can veto it, and we think he will most likely veto it. And then it would take a 2/3 majority of the city council to override his veto. That's 8 city councilors. So I can tell you that our 2 city councilors, Joan and Chip, voted on, when we were forming the ad hoc committee, and they were forming the ad hoc committee, they voted that we could make no design changes to save trees. And that was a last minute, that was just a last minute, it just short-circuited the whole process, because as you can see, we couldn't make any changes to where these walkways were or the pavement was. So we saved just about everything we could that wasn't in the way of the plan. So,
and could I?
Yes.
I'm Monique for Keep the Park Green. And I also want to acknowledge, once again, I've said this many, many times, having just read the mayor's latest piece that he's put out in Front Porch Forum. Once again, we have to contradict a lot of the assertions that he makes in that. First of all, Keep the Park Green attended 22 planning meetings. 22. How many meetings have you ever gone to 22 in a row on a particular topic? We went and we hit on a button that said coming soon. Now, I don't know about you, but that usually means that there's nothing there. But it turned out that there was something there, and it was the plan for cutting the trees down. And that's when we alerted people, and that's when you started seeing hundreds of people coming to the Development Review Board committees to speak out against this. And why do you think that they kept that pertinent issue hidden away? They assured the city councilors, oh, we're going to be saving, all the, the mature trees that we can. Well, that was absolutely not true. And so we attended all the DRB meetings. We had more people attend the DRB meetings that had potentially ever been to a DRB meeting, even with people who were protesting the Synex project. And we were still slap down, slap down, slap down. We had so much response that frankly the city council was becoming embarrassed by the number of people that we were getting, and therefore granted us this ad hoc committee. The mayor voted against every single proposal that we made in that committee, and not a single one of our proposals came forward. So I don't really consider the fact that we were allowed to sit on that board to be meaningful when it was essentially stacked against us, so we couldn't do anything. I mean, that's just simply a very, very twisted way of presenting the facts. And as far as we've been accused of top of the line, and if you have his credentials that you want to talk about it, we hired the top of the line, like 2% of arborists in the country received this designation of a master consulting arborist, an independent one who didn't have ties to the city, because we're also wise to, how people are very dependent on city money, and you're not going to really get objectivity. He came in, and we had to pay for him to do an entire analysis of the city, because the city refused to give analysis of all the trees. They wanted to do what's known in environmental permitting as segmenting off their project and not giving the full scope of how many to keep. And so we did that. We came up with the money. We presented our results to the city. And, they couldn't say much more about it because they really can't question the credentials of our guy. And, we showed that many more trees were healthy, and that the trees that were, in fact, of these trees, only 4 trees of these trees are considered in poor condition. The majority are healthy,
That they're
and
cutting.
that they're cutting, and the ones in the middle have conditions that can be remediated by aerating the roots and dealing with the compacted soil. Once again, no records of the city ever doing that. I also am an attorney, and I FOIA'd the records of how this plan was developed, starting in 2011. Well, what do you know? The guy who got the contract for the park was already involved from the very beginning. And he just happens to be a wife of a city official who was getting hundreds of thousands of dollars for this project. This project was cooked up way before it went out for robust public comment. Their surveys that they claimed that they had, their own surveys, they were completely, anyone who knows anything about surveys didn't gather the information about the people, where they're from, or anything like that. Tourists that were moving through the BCA got to comment on some plan. The 2 graphs that they have put forward to support this, not a single one of them says they want more shade, and not a single one of them says they want more trees.
So
And
I
that's-
don't want to cut you off, but we have to do the reso, and we have to have a little conversation.
So I just want to
we're running out
say
of time fast.
that we're the little guys here. We don't have money. We don't have connections. We just believe that the thousands of people who have already signed our ballot resolution, if you see the language in that ballot resolution, it's very conservative. And we believe that, if taxpayers are going to be stuck with a $3 million bill, that they really ought, well, there's going to be contributed money, but $3 million should be taxpayer money, that people should be able to weigh on this. This is not the naming of a sports team. This is $3 million of taxpayer money. And I personally don't think that people support throwing good money after bad. I think that we can do this more cheaply. We can use money for things that need money, like Memorial Auditorium. I mean, the city has already been asked this last election to come up with $10 million for various things that we're borrowing, into the future. So we want, and I just want to say one last thing. Every single meeting that we went to, we said, we want to work with you. We want to compromise. We don't want to be adversarial. You can go to the videotape for that one. And the thing is that, you know, all we got was, you don't know what you're talking about, misinformation, the trees are all sick. And it's just really, it's been disappointing to see that when citizens do try to get involved, how incredibly difficult it is to make any change.
And if you think we're giving out any misinformation, we'd like to know.
Right.
We'd be happy to correct it.
Right. So, you know, I really appreciate you giving us the time here. We believe that we can come to a solution that makes the park accessible for all and wonderful for all. But I really think that, you know, the people have spoken to us and said that they really want to retain the cooling oasis of this park. And planting a bunch of saplings that aren't going to provide shade for, you know, decades is just not going to cut it. We want a big, open, flat, hot heat sink. So that's our position. We know that the city has a different position. We respect their positions and the jobs that they have to do. But that's why we were forced to kind of bring it to the people. So we really appreciate your time, and we're here to answer any questions and clarify anything that we've said.
So, people, why don't you fire away with questions, thoughts?
Andy?
I don't know if you recognizing people
Or do you want me to, or do you
I
want to do
think
that?
you can,
Okay.
let's see how it goes.
All right.
I'm sorry, I wanted to clarify that, or reiterate that this is the resolution that's being voted on tonight is supporting, asking the city council to put this on the ballot. This is not a vote necessarily in favor of your ballot item.
Exactly.
It's a vote to ask the city council to put this on the, if there are enough signatures to put this on the ballot. Is that right?
To let people decide, and then the city can come during that process and present all their guns and all their experts and everything, you know, and we're confident enough in our position, so we welcome that.
Okay, that's just a clarification.
Ron?
Yeah, I have a question.
You want to say your name and where you live?
Ron Unwin, I live on Maple and South San Francisco. I understand that they're widening the sidewalks, and that's why they're eradicating the trees. And I understand they're widening the sidewalks to accommodate people with disabilities, wheelchairs, whatever. I want to know if there was any complaints from people with disabilities that what we have already is inadequate. You know,
So the question is, are they widening in response to complaints? Do you know the answer to that, Cindy?
I can answer the questions first. They're widening the paths to make them more accessible. Have there been specific complaints as far as two wheelchairs trying to pass and them calling City Hall and saying that we can't get through? I can't speak to that if there have been specific complaints. But in my world, you don't wait till somebody complains to make things accessible. You're past the point if someone had to complain about it. And I just want to touch on this pathway here. That's where we talk about balancing competing interests. This pathway is being shifted. It's a bit of an angle to make it more accessible. If we shift it this way, we take out those trees. We shift it this way, we take out these trees. So yes, we are losing some healthy trees, but they're for accessible reasons.
So I'd like to interrupt if you don't mind.
Sure,
And
go
just
ahead.
say that we already have a path there that is wide enough. All of the paths in the park, and we know this because we called the New England ADA Center in Boston. They're the experts that provide technical advice for communities in New England. And they told us that all of the paths in our park already exceed the width for ADA requirements. So I beg to differ that the reason this path is getting widened, this path, even after the construction is done, and this path will not be accessible because they're on that downward part of the hill and it's just too steep. It's just too steep. They're wide enough, but they're too steep. They're too steep now and they'll be too steep after the $4 million plan.
Yeah, this one will be too steep. We're doing the best we can
And
to get it.
this will be too steep right there as
All
well.
right, I want to give Joan a chance, she was finally.
Sure. And I just had one, I want to touch on the, and I'll just, when we get a chance to.
I just wanted to, according to the city arborist, there are 7 trees being cut because they are in poor health, not 4. just correct that. And with regard to the ADA, I do have a constituent who lives near the park and uses the park regularly and uses a wheelchair and is raising his 2 young daughters there really because he needs to have that access because he uses a wheelchair. And this park redesign is extremely important to him. I don't think that it's so much the width of the pathways. I think the width of the pathways is a design feature, not just an ADA feature. The ADA, the important ADA feature of the path is the curve of the path so that it's less of an incline to get from one end to another. It makes it much easier for people in wheelchairs if the incline isn't as steep as what we have today. But the other problem is if you look at the paths that we have today that are narrower, they're in fact wider than the pavement, much wider, because there are too many people using the park and they're widening the paths in and of themselves. So when you look at what we have now in terms of pavement, that's correct, but in terms of what's impervious surface today, that is not a true picture of what's impervious surface because people are using much wider paths than what exists.
So Cindy, and then you.
Well, I feel like it's important to touch on this ADA thing, because
Yeah,
I also.
I'd like to
Yes,
respond,
we
I'd
do.
like to respond to what
Yeah,
we've heard.
That's me, sorry.
Want me
I
to-
mean, well, I was just gonna say, I also have 2 friends in wheelchairs who have come and actually spoke at the ad hoc committee. When we went to the ADA people, please tell them what the requirements are and what we already have without any work being done.
So all of the paths are wide enough, they exceed the width requirements. And we already have, what's required is 1 path into the park to be accessible. And we already exceed that with 3 accessible paths into the park. The one additional path that this $4 million plan would add would be this one right here. And 50 yards away, there's an accessible path. So does it really make sense to relocate these paths and widen them and cut down all of those trees when there's an accessible path 50 yards away?
And three paths for the entire, for 1 block park.
And then the other,
I do want to get everyone a chance to talk, I don't have a ton of time. I'm
it's
sorry.
just we don't have a chance ever to refute what the city is saying. We've done our
I am
homework
trying to
and
give
we
you
would
guys
like
a chance to talk.
we'd like to respond to it because they keep saying it, but just because they keep
Do you
saying
feel
it.
like you haven't had a chance to respond to John?
Yes. I would like to respond to one other thing. She said that there's 7 trees in poor condition being cut down. So the independent arborists that we hired, there's something about being a consulting arborist. There's no more objective voice than a consulting arborist. It's a certification that arborists get. Our guy is like really well qualified, a master consulting arborist. He said there's 7 trees in the park that are in poor condition, and our city arborist said there are 17 trees in poor condition. So we know that there's a disparity in how our city arborist assesses the health of a tree compared to someone who has a much higher level of credentials than he has.
Is this including the ones that have already been cut
So,
down?
and we gave our report from our independent arborist to the city and all the councilors for their use. And we did a comparative analysis and sent that to them as well, so.
And the city had not provided a report, it had just provided a map. They had never produced an official report about the health of each tree. Like I said, they resisted and wouldn't do the whole park because, just so you know, some of the trees that they're claiming that they're keeping are in poor condition, but they're going to, are struggling from the same conditions for the ones that they want to cut down and say, oh, they're struggling. Well, these other trees are also struggling, and they're going to be treating them. They're going to be using their air spades that they own to deal with the gurgling roots and compacted soil, and they have never done that for these other trees because essentially they're in the way of the plan.
So I just want to give you guys a heads up about timing in the
Okay.
agenda.
Yeah.
So we're going to bump the last item off the agenda to make more time. We're already way over. So what I'd like to do is continue talking for another 5 minutes, and then at 7:10 we're going to do resolution vote.
Thank you.
So I just wanna let you know it's happening.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Cindy,
Thank
and
you.
then you've been waiting for a while.
Thank you very much for that.
Okay, great. So I think we've got enough on trees. We've got amazing, awesome arbor for one safety people.
I know, we don't need to,
So I just want to talk about, a little bit about the, there's a lot of talk as far as the increase of the paved areas. We have 3,500 square feet of permeable pavers. So a lot of the areas in through here are permeable pavers. And our Jenna Olson, who is our stormwater expert, just gave us a few numbers. So she just notes that the design, as proposed, includes 3 bioretention areas, which will provide treatment for both the impervious surfaces within the park, as well as a large portion of the northbound lane of St. Paul Street at the park's western edge. The proposed design further includes nearly 3,500 square feet of permeable pavers and will restore 49,268 square feet of currently compacted lawn space and paved areas. Overall, the breakdown is as follows. Existing condition, total effective impervious surface is 43.3%. Total, and then in the proposed condition, total effective impervious surface will be 32.6%. So 43.3 now, 32.6 when we're done of impervious. So we're actually improving things, and we're doing a great job with the stormwater, which is something that's, whenever we do a new park construction now, we look to see what can we do for stormwater, because we just didn't think about it, 50 years ago about taking care of that. And there's also some subsurface detention structures that are in there too. And she says overall the design will result in a 30% reduction in peak flow during a 1-year storm event and nearly 52% peak flow reduction during a 10-year storm event with the work that we're doing.
I have to respond to that if I can.
Sure.
So, there's nothing that would prevent them from replacing the paved areas with pervious pavers. That could be a realistic improvement without having to move the paths and increase the actual paved areas. So we just don't buy that.
It's your choice.
And we also would like to share, we have some documentation also about, that degree of mature trees do fix stormwater. They do ensure that stormwater actually travels down farther into the soil, so it's not necessarily runoff, or it doesn't necessarily have to be channeled along what they have these plans for these channels of for water runoff. The trees, not only do they cool the park by evapotranspiration, they provide shade, which is extremely important on hot days. And by increasing that whole area there,
There'll be no shade.
that's going to be a
Pretty
heat
much
sink.
no
That's
shade.
going to be generating heat, permeable paver or not, there's still paver there. And that is essentially like giving away one of our assets that make the park pleasant. I showed
Excuse
people.
me, ma'am, I
I'm
feel like you're
seriously
giving
gonna
like
get
no
run out of
time
time.
to the people that are also trying to present the alternative case.
Actually, we were on the agenda to present, we didn't know this was gonna be a debate
So
format.
everything, the community always has a chance to
Okay.
respond. And I mean, this unfortunately, that's the nature of NPA. There's short
Okay.
presentations with
Sure.
with a lot of Q&A. I totally
Okay.
understand that you want to make your case to the community.
Yeah.
I've been there. But
Yeah,
this actually isn't the best format for that sometimes.
what is?
I'm not in charge of the whole
What is?
thing.
So I think that would be a topic for discussion for the NPAs, like what is the best?
So I totally understand your frustration.
We only get 2 minutes. We
Okay.
get 2
You have a
minutes.
question, go ahead.
Yes, so this sheet that says facts about City Hall Park was handed out at the beginning. I'm just wondering who is responsible for this, because it's not clear, and could Donna or Monique speak to, is this something you put out, are the facts actually presented? So I'd like Donna to answer this, or
The facts about City Hall Park, I don't know who put that out.
because
We
I
did
felt
not.
that this was very sneaky, and I'd like to know, who, if you're gonna put out so-called facts, could you please sign it and, let
I
people
put
know?
it out. I didn't mean to be sneaky, I'm sorry, I just wrote it and printed it moments before this.
Okay,
And
so
I wanted to speak to it, but I haven't had the
actually, I'd like
opportunity.
to hear what Donna would, if you have any comments about any of these facts that are presented in this sheet. If you or
We don't-
Monique could respond.
I don't want to, because we're
Excuse me,
told
may
we're
I
running out of
interrupt?
time.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Could, before you speak, could you be recognized by the chair? It's very confusing for people to jump in the conversation, so Joanne, would you recognize people by, if they
Yeah,
put
but
up their
honestly,
hand and
it's
you
7:10,
recognize
we
and then
need to
speak?
vote on the resolution.
Thank you.
We're over time, thanks for
Thank
Bill's
you.
also in the steering
And
committee.
thank you again for changing the bumping that last article off so we could have our say.
So
Appreciate
thanks,
your-
guys, we appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
So I really appreciate, I understand everyone has a lot of passion on this issue. I totally get that. I've been an advocate of different issues in the community before, and I know that NPA can sometimes be a frustrating situation, and it also can be an enriching situation. It's just, there's no perfect fit, you know, for this kind of thing. So anyway, so we're gonna do, oops, this is the wrong one. We're gonna do a vote on the, I guess this is better for the text in front of me. We're gonna do a vote on the resolution. So do people know what we're voting on?
It's on the ballot. Voting whether or not to put this on the ballot, the question.
Okay, so I just want to remind you all that only Ward 5 residents can vote. Everyone is welcome to come here, and we'd love to have, you know, visitors from other wards. It's always fun. I've been to a few NPA meetings at other wards, and I think it's really great to see what other people are doing and talking about. But I'm not gonna check your driver's license. I'm just telling you, like, put on our system, like, you're in Ward 5, you can vote, and if you're not, please don't. Okay, so, I would like to get people to raise and hold their hands high if you are for this resolution.
To put it on the ballot.
Put it on the ballot. Okay. Okay, that's 22-4. Okay, let's get the no's. Hold your hand high. All right, it passed.
What was the?
Oh, it was 22 yes and 7 no.
We also have 2 city councilors on the note, if they allow.
If they live in Ward 5, they're allowed to vote. Yep. So congratulations and thank you for partaking in the NPA system. Okay, so we are going to move ahead. Megan Tuttle is going to talk to us about Plan BTV.
I'll just do a quick introduction. My name is Harris Rowan. I live on Scarf Avenue, Ward 5. I'm on the planning commission. And I'm really happy to present this Plan BTV, the comprehensive, the overall plan for Burlington.
So I'm just going to start to circulate a couple of handouts. I'll leave some more over here as well, if anyone else wants one. But they'll give you just a helpful resource that you can take away today, and or leave comments that you might have as we're talking tonight. So as Harris said, Harris is one of our planning commissioners. We've been working with the planning commission and the community over the last year to update what we call Plan BTV, which is the city's plan that considers all aspects of land use and development type issues for the next 10 to 20 years. Some of you may know of plans like Plan BTV South End or the Downtown Master Plan, which really looked very specifically at certain parts of our city and helped us answer questions about some of the priorities that we had for those parts of the city. This document that we've been working on updating is really kind of the umbrella plan that helps us understand what our citywide challenges and opportunities are and what we want to do with them in the future. So it really sets the foundation for some of those other plans that we've created that you might be familiar with. Joe, if you could skip ahead. The screen is a little bit different. Normally I would be able to just run through this on my own, so we'll go through this.
Just a second.
The next one would be great.
No more handouts?
No, I have one. Great.
Yeah, we need a few over here too.
Okay, great. So with this plan, in the past, if you are familiar with this plan at all, it's very comprehensive in that it considers a wide range of issues for our community. Things like housing, transportation, economic development, the natural environment. One of the things that the Planning Commission has been working towards with this update is helping us to better understand the relationship among all of these issues. That things that we do related to housing or transportation are also related to the outcomes for the natural environment or for our parks and recreation system. So we've been reframing this plan to help present the opportunities and challenges that we have as a community around sort of the characteristics that we hear you as residents and hear others talk about a lot in our community, and present these issues together within that framework. So what I want to do is just kind of talk quickly about what those characteristics are and what types of topics each of those characteristics touches on, so that you can understand a little bit more about what's in this updated plan. So Joe, if you could skip to the next one. The first sort of characteristic that we talk about Burlington is about its distinctive identity. We can all think of ways that Burlington has a unique identity, whether it's the natural setting in which our community is located, the historic structures that make up a lot of our built landscape, even the kinds of conversations that are happening here in this room, the sort of cultural and civic identity that we have as a community. Next one, Joe. So this part of the plan talks about what are the important elements of our identity and what are some of the goals that we have for the future in terms of continuing to foster that identity. How will we preserve and enhance those elements that make our community unique? All the way from our natural resources and parks to how our community is physically built, and issues like what is our economic identity? What types of jobs and economic resources do we have in our community? Next one, Joe. The next characteristic that the plan talks about is how Burlington is a dynamic city. And this is really about how we take those elements of our community that make us unique and continue to leverage them to address challenges that we experience. Some of these challenges are chronic challenges that many of us know and have worked on for a long time, like housing affordability and availability. Other ones are issues that we're just starting to see the impacts of and can anticipate that we will need to deal with in a much greater way, like climate change and other hazards that will impact the city as a result of climate change. So the next slide, Joe, talks about those things that Burlington is going to continue to address in terms of challenges and opportunities for its future. Many of these are related to, also related to our role within the region. We are in many ways the heart of the Chittenden County region and even Northwest Vermont. So what are some of the responsibilities and obligations as well as benefits that we have as a community because of that role? The next characteristic is about Burlington as an inclusive community. And this is really about all of those ways that we want to overcome barriers to participation and inclusion in our community. The next slide, Joe. This is about overcoming disparities that we have in the community, creating more opportunity for everyone in our community to be involved. This is about things like housing opportunity, economic opportunity, making sure that everyone has access to a job that meets their needs and earns a livable wage. What are some of the supportive infrastructure elements that are necessary to ensure that people can participate in the economy, like childcare and transportation accessibility, as well as making sure that our community is physically accessible, that buildings and public space are not only accessible from a physical perspective like we were talking about this evening for people that might have different mobility needs, but also in terms of being safe and welcoming for people of different sensibilities or different cultures, that they can all feel welcome in our community. And then finally, having opportunities for participation. So when we talk about this element of the plan, it's, of course, it's expanding opportunity to have dialogue about community projects and important issues, but also ways that we make sure that we're hearing from voices that aren't typically able to be a part of the conversation, especially youth or people that are new to our community that might have language access issues, those types of priorities. And then the last is Burlington as a connected city. And obviously the word connected has a lot of meaning. This really is intentional and it's meant to represent a broad range of issues that we think about when we think about connections. You can go to the next slide, Joe. This is about things like how our built structures in our city relate to the natural environment. Things like how we physically move around our city, how we can get from one place to the other. How we make sure that people have access to utilities and resources that will meet their needs, making sure we have adequate sewer and internet to meet the needs of our community. as well as connection in terms of decision making. Making sure that we're looking at the long-term impacts of decision making and the cumulative effect of decision making over time. So in the updated plan, many of the types of action items that will help us to advance issues of economic development or housing or transportation have found their way into these characteristics. And the plan really talks about how those actions will help us to enhance these characteristics and preserve these characteristics of our city. So I hope that you'll be able to look at the plan and kind of dig into what all of those things are. I don't have time to go into them all tonight, but the last thing that I wanted to talk about that the plan addresses is what we call our plan for land use and how we will actually achieve some of these things in the city. So if you'll go to the next slide, Joe. This is really based around three sort of kind of identities of how we'll use land in the future. The first is that the plan identifies areas that we're planning to conserve. The next is areas that we're planning to sustain, and the last one is areas that we're planning that can accommodate growth. So if you go to the next slide, Joe. The first is about those areas that we're planning to conserve. I've talked a little bit already about how the plan discusses our natural environment, our natural setting, the natural resources, the recreational and open space resources in our community. We're very fortunate that nearly 50% of all of the land area in the city of Burlington is some type of open space or natural area. So this part of the plan talks about those parts of our city and what it means for us to actually be able to conserve those areas of the city, how we continue to maintain them for their natural system functions, as well as for the health and enjoyment of our city, kind of balancing the natural and recreational values of these spaces in our community. The next slide talks about what we're talking about, the areas of our community that we're planning to sustain. This is really the residential neighborhoods of Burlington. Another thing that I think is a really strong part of Burlington's identity is that there are so many different neighborhood identities in the city, whether that is the people who live in them and the kind of issues that are important to them, all the way down to what type of housing units and what are the architectural styles like in those neighborhoods. So this part of the plan talks about the fact that we do have many vibrant, diverse neighborhoods in the city that we want to support and strengthen to meet the needs of all of the residents of Burlington over time. But also recognizes that there are some influences that affect our neighborhoods, whether that's proximity to the institutions or an aging population or other types of issues that are kind of evolving in our neighborhoods, and make sure that we're paying attention to how we need to address those strategies over time to ensure that our neighborhoods continue to be strong and vibrant places. So the last piece then is about areas that can accommodate growth. We know that we have needs for housing and we have needs for economic growth in our community, and that we will have those needs in various ways over time. So this part of the plan talks about what areas in the community are suitable to accommodate that growth in the future. So if we have many areas of the city that we're planning to conserve and residential neighborhoods that we want to maintain largely as they are today, these are those sort of areas that are most appropriate for us to facilitate that growth in the future. Much like our residential neighborhoods, these areas that could accommodate growth are not all the same. They have different characteristics. There are different priorities in terms of what type of growth might happen there, or what the character of that growth might look like, building height, or the types of commercial uses, for example. So the plan talks about what each of these different types of areas are, what we might expect in those areas. Things like, what is the role of our downtown, both in Burlington and in our region, versus what's the role of a neighborhood activity center in meeting the needs of day-to-day needs of nearby residents. One area that I think is very important to this ward and to the south end of the city, if you go to the next slide, Joe, is the south end, is the enterprise district. And this is where we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have done a number of planning studies that look specifically at some of these areas where we're planning to grow, and really dives in a much deeper way to help us ask questions and answer questions about what that means for us to grow in the future or to accommodate our needs in the future. So the Plan BTD South End is an example of that kind of a study, that kind of conversation. Where we have done plans and studies like this, whether it's for areas where we might grow or areas we want to conserve, one of the things that we've been trying to do with this update is pull in these studies in a much more explicit way to help us illustrate what it really means to that part of the city and what kind of information we know about those places. So with this update, we are actually going to be including the draft of the Plan BTD South End master plan that the Planning Commission has been working on for quite some time. I think that might be the last one. Joe? Sorry, sorry. So part of the reason why I wanted to come here tonight, why we're here tonight, is to let you know about, first of all, give you this quick overview to how the updated plan is organized, give you a little bit of a preview about what's in it, but also let you know what's going to be happening over the next several months. So the Planning Commission has put together a draft of this plan. We had a great public hearing and workshop on it a couple of weeks ago. And we're going to be continuing that work over the next several months. There will be a number of additional workshops where we can start to dig in and talk about, what are some of the actions that will help us to achieve the goals of the plan? What are some of the things that are really important when we think about being a connected city or being an inclusive city that we need to make sure in this plan before we get to a final draft stage. So I don't have specific dates right now, but we will be doing some of that work in January and February. So please stay tuned. I'll make sure that we get the word out for you about when those events will be. And then we'll continue having the conversation with the City Council with the ultimate goal of having this plan, this update, readopted by the end of March. So kind of coming here as a check-in to let you know where we are in the process and what we've been doing, and give you the handouts that you can take home and use to explore the plan in greater detail if you're able and interested. So with that, I think Harris and I are happy to take any questions you might have.
This is for the whole entire city,
Yes.
as opposed to different parts. Because I remember we had quite a discussion about what you were trying to do in the South End, and we're not happy with a lot of it. In the fact you're trying to put housing in the enterprise zone, and I sure hope that is no longer the plan.
That's absolutely correct.
Because your pictures showed the housing part.
We passed a resolution on that item.
I just want to be really sure.
Yeah, I'll answer that a little too. There is a second draft of the South End plan. In the first draft, housing was potentially recommended. There's now a second draft, that's out of there. The plan is to have that second draft adopted with this overall plan for the city. So that's all going to happen at the same time. So I would urge everyone in this room to read that second draft of the plan to see what's in there and understand it.
Is this, do we have it now, or it's coming?
So you can find it.
It's available.
Yes. So Joe, if you go to the last slide.
Can I go back?
No, go to the very last one. Sorry, right here. So both the update to the citywide plan and the second draft of the South End plan that Harris mentioned, both of those are available and have been available online for some time that you can take a look at them. But Carolyn, yes, to directly answer your question, an earlier iteration of the plan had talked about the opportunity to consider locations on the South End where housing could be appropriate, but we heard very clearly that that was an idea that was off the table, and that was something that Harris and the Planning Commission worked very specifically on to go through everything that was in that plan and completely overhaul the recommendations, and the plan acknowledges that there still are needs for considering locations for housing in the global South End, but not in the enterprise zoning district, right?
Okay, because the enterprise district is in this map too.
Right. Which is
Because that growth is manufacturing growth, job growth, those kind of things that are allowed in enterprise zone, not housing growth.
arts, innovation, manufacturing, those types of uses.
The plan just overwhelms me. You've done so much work, but I can't begin to sort of find my way through it. And when there are public meetings, like the one on the 5th and what have you, if you come up with some plans that come out of some of those public meetings, is there a way that we can, is there a blog, or, I mean, how do we know what we missed?
That's a great question. So I think your comment about this plan being a lot is spot on. And that's sort of the role of this plan, is to consider all of the issues that the city needs to be thinking about kind of in one place. So I definitely understand that it's hard to digest. One of the things that we did at that December 5th meeting was broke the plan down first into kind of these goals. What are the high-level goals that are in this plan? And we talked about them in small groups. We gave people lots of time to really get familiar with them, talk about what they meant to them, talk about what they might think would be important if we were going to be successful in achieving those goals. So what we're going to be doing at the future workshops is going to be a continuation of that, trying to break this down into bite-sized pieces so that we can really think about what it means. What we're doing with the feedback from that, and what should be on our project website very soon, is a summary of what we heard at that meeting. There are a number of resources, presentations and summaries from throughout the past year that will, I think, provide a pretty good summary of what happened in the past.
So that'll be on the Plan BTV as you, and you'll update it as you come up. Thank you.
Yep. And you can also, if you don't have access to read a full document, we also have the plan on that website as well.
Thanks.
So it sounds like this is a vision piece, and that's what your first paragraph here says, outlining a vision. So can you speak to how this actually gets translated into policy or ordinances, or, you know, is it just our notion of a good way to approach planning, and people will hopefully refer to it as they make actual decisions on it, or how does that actually get in?
Right, that's also a really wonderful question. So we use Plan BTV in a number of ways in the city. The most direct way that we use it is to inform our zoning ordinance. So whenever we are considering changes to the zoning, we use Plan BTV as our guide to determine whether or not it's consistent with that vision that we have for city. We use it in a number of other ways. It helps us kind of prioritize some public investments we might make. It might help us identify programs that we need to, start up in CEDO, or projects that we can work on with other community partners. It can inform a lot of things that we do in that regard. It also helps us to receive funding. We can apply for state grants as part of this. We can use our plan to help us participate in statewide economic development programs and other things that can provide direct benefits to the city and to property owners within the city to help us achieve some of these goals. So we hope that it's a little bit more than just kind of a we hope, but it really informs a lot of different kind of decisions that we use.
So thank you so much.
Thank
Megan.
you.
Really
Thanks
appreciate
for having
your time.
me.
Thank you for accommodating us. All right, awesome. So next up, we've got Chip and Joan, the Ward 5 City Councilors. Thank you also for accommodating our schedules. Democracy is messy.
Right?
Here's one strap.
Okay. That's our first needed tripwire.
Do we ever do? Well, let me first apologize. I was not intending to share that piece of paper without telling you that it was for me. I thought that there would be an opportunity for us to address it, but there wasn't, and we voted on it, so we'll move on. But it was for me. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me after the meeting. We have a lot going on. I'm the chair of the Charter Change Committee and on the PAC committee. And in those committees, we've got Memorial Auditorium, the Moran, permit reform, and the Downtown Investment District. So they're all
pretty huge things going on. With Moran, I don't know, I think you, probably most of you have seen.
That the mayor has, so the mayor has put forth a proposed re-envisioning, I'm not sure what the frame, I think is what it's called.
Can you articulate?
Sure. The mayor has put forth a revised plan for Moran. I think they're calling it frame, and it's an acronym, I don't quite remember what it stands for. But if you haven't seen it, please go online. At this point, it was presented to us only for purposes of, is there potentially any support for this? And the council did say yes. It needs,
just summarize it in 25 words.
it's a, how do I say?
It's stripped away.
Basically,
Everything is stripped away.
Correct. It's
You
a
have a
steel
skeleton.
structure with one wall. It's an open space.
It's very skeletal.
It is very skeletal.
And you can build off of it, so you can put roofs at different levels, you can provide varying degrees of shelter. You can have an ice rink, it's planned to have bathrooms.
Those are
And then you can,
down.
Yeah.
well, I think those are in the phase, bathrooms and stuff were.
Bathrooms, not the rink or any of the other.
Yeah.
The issue is, we discovered, I think there was sort of an informal guess about what it would cost to take care of Moran in the event we tore it down. Unfortunately, costs associated with the environmental, because it was a coal-burning plant, I think are vastly in excess of, original estimates. So when you look at, and there's a range depending on how clean you want the site, if you just want to leave the slab versus literally, move the dirt, it's over, it's from $3 to $10 million just to get back to a site. So this was in the $6 million range, paid for by TIF funds. So it was sent to the Parks, Art and Culture Committee to there were some questions. I had some concerns, not just the upfront cost, what are the carrying costs associated with this? Are we gonna be able to attract, vendors and other fee payers in order to allow it to support itself? So I believe, PAC will be working through those.
We actually have had a meeting on it already. And I would say that the response, like my initial, I don't like change, I admit that. And my initial response when I saw this stark frame was, I'm not so sure about that. But then when I saw kind of the things you could add on and the uses that you could build in from that frame, I started to warm up to it a little. And I would say that we've had a lot of very positive response from different places that I wouldn't expect. So I think that it might prove to be a nice compromise. And Memorial Auditorium, we also had a presentation on that, and the administration looked at 4 different plans, all of which had the goal of retaining Memorial Auditorium as a publicly owned public space, and really looked at the historic uses of this space and did a lot of surveying to find out what's important to people. And in the 4 plans, the problem was always, how do you pay for this? And there was a baseline of going to the public for a $15 million GO bond, which requires a 2/3 vote, and that's really all we feel we can afford within our debt limits. And we still had a gap with like 3 of the 4 plans. So the 4th plan is a public-private partnership that would really look at the whole block and look at bringing TIF funds in for the redevelopment of the whole block, which helps bridge that gap. And so there aren't a lot of details in any of these plans. It was, they just brought them forward. It was a pretty well-attended public meeting where they brought these 4 different plans forward and then broke out into small groups and had each group kind of evaluate the various plans. And I think that there was something close to a consensus that we need to further develop this public-private partnership. So more on that will be coming. The Downtown Improvement District will really expand what we have with the Church Street Marketplace, not expanding in terms of the bricks, but expanding in terms of the function and unifying our downtown, bringing more amenities to the downtown that are paid for by the fee payers.
bringing more fee payers into what is now the Church Street Marketplace. So there are 40 fee payers in the Church Street Marketplace, and I've had the privilege of traveling to some what we consider to be comparable cities like Boulder, Colorado, and Ithaca, New York, and Portland, to look at what they're doing in their downtowns. And wherever we go, people are always astounded that we have supported the Church Street Marketplace with only 40 fee payers. It doesn't make any kind of economic sense. And we've done that because we've had a lot of federal grants, so the money hasn't only been coming from these fee payers. But as those federal grants are really drying up, we need to start figuring out how that's going to be sustaining itself. And I think it's something that's not only important to the business community, but it's the living room for all of us. And we're all going to be seeing the $70 million school bond coming onto our tax bills, so we need to find other sources for these, you know, for the amenities of downtown. And I think that the Downtown Improvement District is going to be it's going to give more authority to those fee payers to decide how they're spending money, but the city still has to approve their budget, has to approve their bylaws, has to, we appoint 7 of 13 members on their board, so the city maintains a lot of control as we move forward with that.
You got pretty into the weeds pretty fast, just based on the reactions. So this is a charter, what Joan is referring to, the creation of this DID will be a charter change, and it will potentially, we'll vote on this, the council has to vote whether to put it on the ballot, but on the assumption it passes the council, all the voters will be asked to approve these charter changes and the creation of this downtown improvement district.
Yeah, sorry.
How many people?
I've been too far in the weeds on that.
How many people what? On the board? So right now, the Church Street Marketplace is appointed by the council. And part of the tension with the business owners have been they feel on Church Street they're paying in but have no say in how those dollars are spent. We don't get, you know, that really is controlled on the city's part. So this, in addition to expanding beyond just Church Street, as Joan alluded to, is trying to bring in more fee payers, but these are for what we'll say are additional services above and beyond what the city provides. So we're still doing, you know, the street maintenance, the sidewalks, the policing. The policing.
No, but how many more fee payers?
I don't.
It was
goes all the way down to the
138 or
water.
something, I think.
It's a big, it's a much larger, and this assumes the creation of a nonprofit entity, what's called a 501c6, consisting of.
Who's in the weeds?
13.
Bill?
Bill.
First of all, a 13-person DID is very, very unwieldy. You've been around for a 14-person city council, and that was quite unwieldy. I think a more realistic number would be 7 or 9. Secondly, I still think the proposed design of the Moran plant is still work in progress. I just don't think it's attractive for the waterfront. Is a compelling reason for going in this direction, the $5.4 million that has to be spent by the end of 2019? Is that the compelling reason for going forward with this? I see a no and a yes.
I don't think that's why going forward with this. I think we're aware that those dollars have to be spent.
Well, going forward with something, figuring out a way forward.
Yes, quickly, but not necessarily this. This didn't come because of.
Right. We could use the TIP funds in a variety of ways, but we need to figure out.
A path quickly.
We need something that we can do, yeah.
By the end of 2019?
Yeah, and this will be paid for by TIP funds. Mom?
You answered my question, thank you. In the course of your...
I was going to say is about 5 years ago, we all, a group of us, found buildings that had been deconstructed partly. And so the new idea, I think, is commendable. I don't know who came up with it, but I know that there are a lot of places, and I'll see if I can find my notes, where there's one, I believe, in Seattle, where it was an old
you should look at the presentation. The presentation
Yes.
has a number of examples where they've done this in Switzerland and Seattle. So
okay, well, I don't know who did the presentation, but I didn't see it.
And it was also actually at the same time, I think the folks in CEDO were coming up with this idea.
the new Moran folks who had been, trying to get this developed were coming up with the same idea, and so they started working together and collaborating to bring what's coming forward now. They have not endorsed it yet, but they have been working with CEDO to develop this plan.
They're waiting.
I'm sorry, pardon me.
Yeah.
I just want to know what was going on with Sinex.
I don't know.
Is it still, he's still not doing anything?
We have not had an update.
Well, we know he's been driving by and see if he's working.
Not that we can tell, I can say that.
What are we talking about?
Right. She asked about City Place.
Oh, science, I'm sorry.
I am not aware, there is no news other than what's been reported in the papers.
Let's just say he's not doing anything.
So I do want to let other people get a chance to ask questions too.
No, I'm
So-
sorry, I didn't part of it.
My question was, raising the Moran plant and having nothing but green, is that not financially viable?
That's
It is.
a $10 million plan.
Pardon me?
To go to get it completely remediated and have green grass.
No, just remove the building completely and do nothing but have grass.
Yeah.
I think it's somewhere, it's north of 3 and south of 10, but it's an expensive.
So I thought that was the $10 million.
Is that more expensive than in the
No, I think it's, my understanding is it's less. The proposal of the redevelopment is
No,
slightly more expensive. I mean, it depends on how deep you go.
You still have, at 3.5 million, you still have the concrete pad.
Slab.
Yeah, you haven't fully, and you haven't gotten into the soils and all of that.
Right,
So,
right.
once you fully clean the site, fully get rid of everything, plant the grass so that you can have recreation, that's the, I thought that was the $10 million. If not, it's the high end of that range.
So that is just as expensive, if not more, than others?
You're leaving the slab, when you do the redevelopment, you're leaving, so I
Right,
think
it's
that's,
and you cover it with soil and
it's the
grass.
soil, it's, very- as we discovered, they
Yes.
discovered in City Place, taking dirty soil and finding a place to put it is not
We
cheap.
had
No,
that
no,
same
you-
problem with City Market, on the board of City Market, and like one of the reasons it was so expensive to build this building was remediating the soil and doing
It didn't,
environmental
5 years ago,
way.
this was not as big an issue, now it's a huge problem. I mean, you can take anywhere in the city of Burlington, and that's an issue, unfortunately.
But there are needs on the waterfront that leaving this frame and structure to build off of can meet. Either, some of them can meet in the near term when it's built, and some, further out over time.
The expanded market,
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I thought, I'll go to Sue, and then you, sorry, she had her question for you. Thank
sorry, the expanded marketplace, or whatever the right term is that gonna follow a geographical map, or,
you. Oh, the DID, you're saying?
I don't know what it's called, but the proposal to make the marketplace bigger,
Oh,
to get more vendors paying into it.
that,
What, is that, because the thing I saw in the news was, on the corner of South Champlain and Maple Street, by Handy's. So it sort of said to me that it's gonna get bigger geographically, and how big? What dictates where it goes?
There's a map.
So there is a geographical map.
yes, as part of the resolution, it's expansion of the DID in accordance with the map.
Where do I find that?
I can get it to you. I mean, it's also on board, with the publicly available board docs.
Where is it?
The city council website has a section.
It was after the last city council?
We discussed it in our last meeting, so it's on the
Okay,
agenda.
I looked before the last
Nope.
meeting.
The
Okay,
map is in the materials that
Okay.
were up
city council
in our
agenda.
last, at our last
Okay.
meeting.
Okay, thanks.
And it definitely does expand it and goes in the.
And people don't, if that passes, then every commercial space in that area then will contribute financially?
Residential properties will not
Right.
contribute, even if they're rental properties,
Okay.
but, yes, commercial spaces would.
Not if you're a state, nonprofit, and there's also, there is a process by which you
Nonprofits
can
will.
seek abatement on that space as well.
Okay, thanks.
There's a process for abatement, but yes, because there's some very large nonprofits that, the medical center would be one of those.
So might that include like the new parking garage on the Champlain College building, or Champlain College? Who owns that?
It's a good question. I don't know if that would be,
if that would be considered residential, because it's supporting the residential
Okay,
use.
I don't need to get in that minutia, never mind. Get out of the weeds.
Oh, I'm sorry, you were waiting.
Well, actually, I don't need to go now.
So can I throw out two things before, because we're running out of time, which I think are relevant to the South End and what we do. We just had, at last Monday's meeting, we took another step on the Champlain Parkway. We had what was called the compensation hearing, so there's a statutory process that has to be followed before you can sort of take property, which is what we were doing. So we've already done, 2 months ago, we did what's called the necessity hearing, where we determined, yes, in order to do the project, these temporary easements for construction purposes, up with properties abutting Pine Street and others. Our hearing Monday was the compensation. How much are we going to pay the owners of these properties? And they were nominal dollars. And these are very negligible impacts on abutting. They
They
were
weren't
$250
contested.
and $500. But it is yet another step. I had a constituent email with Chapin saying, the director of public works, great, good step. When is it going to be built? Chapin's response was they are now looking at the latter part of 2019. The sort of sticking issues still remain. We are in litigation with, there's one property owner in particular that contests every step along the way. Hope and expectation is that will work its way through and latter part of 2019. The other thing that you will see, because we've already passed it, relates to permit reform, and that again is something that Joan's committee has spent a lot of time with. It's a proposal that, if passed, would sort of combine multiple departments into what's a new permitting and inspection. So it would be taking sort of the parts from DPW, parts from planning and zoning, and parts from, which is the third one, code enforcement, and putting them all in one location. The suggestion or the current plan is to put them all on Pine Street. So for anyone, and we often hear from constituents who's had to replace a fence or a shed and gotten sort of, no, you need to go to, Public Works on Pine Street, and well, we can't help you, you have to go back to City Hall, that's a Department of Planning. This is intended to be a one-stop shopping, predominantly benefiting the residents, residential, not necessarily, those contractors who have full-time folks, they know how to, get through the system. But we often hear from residents who don't and are very frustrated with this process. This is intended, if it does pass, as a first step. There was sort of a sense of the council to do a much larger permit reform, but the feeling was this was the important first step, and then hopefully other potential permits, to make it easier for residents of Burlington. Those hopefully will follow in the years to come. So sorry, I just wanted to get that out because I know we're running in if there are questions on anything. Andy?
In the discussions of the Moran plant and the Memorial Auditorium, has there been some talk about bringing the Winter Farmers Market back to the center of town?
No, this is open. This is an open structure. So
Memorial though, yes.
oh, if it's done or when it's done. I mean, the original conception was to bring it down. I mean, that was this Moran, the redevelopment was all how do we get people down to the waterfront on a year-round basis. There's an acceptance that an open steel structure is not going to solve the year-round problem, which is why sort of the farmers, or the ice rink and the other sort of winter amenities might seem, there was discussion, I don't remember who it was, about, the cross-country ski team. They currently, I forget where they.
Well, I don't think that there's a desire to move the farmer's market down to the Moran.
Oh, no,
It's
no,
not
no,
central enough, but yes, there's discussion about Memorial.
Well, when in the last iteration of the plan, there was talk about.
Yes,
that.
you're right.
Correct.
Yeah.
Not anymore, because it's an open, as designed, it's a business process.
And we could take like 1 or 2 more questions for these guys.
If there were no farmer's market in the downtown, what we call a park, and it just was a park, would we have to do all this changing of the park?
What's that?
It's not about the farmer's market. It's
I mean,
just
I would say
Oh, I
that's.
think it is about the farmer's market.
It was a
It's
priority for
about
people.
creating a park and turning it into a business area.
That's not really the case.
It isn't?
No, it really is not the case. We want it to be a park, we want it to be the place where people can gather for lots of things. One of the ways our community does gather is with the farmer's market, and that's
definitely having an impact on the park, and it was also important to people that the park be able to accommodate the farmer's market. So that is part of the design is the farmer's market, but that is not the whole thing. I mean, there's definitely a problem with the existing fountain. There's a problem. Cindy?
Yeah, well, the majority of the design actually for the farmer's market that we shared with them is they're surrounding the park.
Exterior.
They're the exterior of the park, and so it's minimized the farmer's market within the park. That the people that, when you're coming to the farmer's market, you would enjoy, but then you can come into the park and enjoy, you know, having your lunch on the lawn or such, but they won't be fully in it again. So there wasn't, yeah.
Well, if anybody's been to the farmer's market and you go into the park, you see why the park looks the way it does.
Correct.
It's all about the farmer's market. It's not about the daily usage of the park by the public.
All right, one more and then I interrupt it.
Yes, and speaking of the park, just one question. I was curious to see whether you were planning to vote to put the City Hall Park resolution on the ballot for town meeting day.
I don't think that at this point in the process, this has been going since 2011. It's been fully permitted. It's gone through all of this public process. If we were to put this on the ballot and give the public the impression that, you know, we're going to go back to square one to the beginning of 8 years of process or 7 years of process, I think, you know, that's, I don't know, somewhere between $500,000 and $750,000 of expenditures up to this point that we're losing. The vote doesn't tell us, do you want more trees or do you want less trees? Because yes, somebody knocked on my door today and said, I don't care about the trees, I want to make sure the farmer's market is there. And they were very concerned about the time they'll have to be out of the park. The farmer's market will have to be out of the park during construction, so it's not necessarily terribly informative to just vote no on this existing design. I think it's kind of easy to vote no on any design because, I mean, if I had to pick a plan, honestly, this is not the plan I would pick, but I don't get to pick a plan. I get to, you know, you go through a process and you establish priorities, and it's hard to design something by committee, but it's certainly impossible to design something by public referendum. So I don't see how we could govern that way, honestly. And we made a lot of concessions. We, you know, when we put this plan forward, we actually took a step back and had a process by which Monique and Donna participated. 4 trees were added back in that process. 4 trees that the design team didn't really think were a good idea to add back in. And at this point, there's 51 trees in the park today. There's going to be 48 trees in the park when this is done.
Joan, did you answer Donna's question? I mean,
They are not saplings. There are no saplings. The trees are going to be up to 10 years old. They're going to be 3.5 to 5 inches in diameter. They're going to be 18 to 20 feet tall. And they're going to be the size that we could buy larger trees, but they won't adapt as well when they go into the park.
I think people should look at the designer's own depictions of the park, and they will see the size of the trees.
So, wait, excuse me, but we're going back into the whole question here. And the question, I think Edward's question was a fairly simple one. Are you going to vote to put this on the ballot if there are enough signatures?
Yeah, was that your fancy way of saying no?
I cannot justify putting this question on the ballot.
Even though we tell you to.
So I'll answer the question in the same way, without getting back into, you know, unfortunately the process, it was not happy. There were multiple things said that I would have liked to have responded to, but did not. I made a decision on June 25th, you know, based on.
Can you speak to the back of the room?
Sure, I'm sorry. Thank you. My mother-in-law did that too. I made a decision on June 25th in order to move this forward, and we have invested capital, time, and money in doing so. I agree with Joan. I have not heard, I mean, we're not voting for a month, but, and I'm willing to listen and listen to my constituents, but now I am, similar to Councilor Shannon, I am inclined to not put it on the ballot, because I believe we've started a process and we should continue.
All right, guys, I think we have to call it. I just want to thank you guys, and I want to thank everyone. This is democracy at work. Like, it's good. I love that everyone cares and they're so passionate. Like, that is awesome.
They all like to kill each other.
That's what
need a bounce vote that's not
So,
Patty fault.
I just wanted to say that, originally, for tonight, at the end of the agenda, Mojo and I were gonna do, a talk, like a sort of facilitated dialogue about NPA and the future of our role in NPA. We're not gonna do that tonight. But I did wanna say, I would love for you guys to be thinking about that, and be thinking about, what do you want out of NPA? What do you think NPA's power should be? You know, what's the future of NPA for the city of Burlington? These are things that we, as a steering committee, are thinking about, and we want all of Ward 5 to be thinking about. And tonight was a really perfect example of
How we
all
have
the
no power.
pros and cons of NPA, and there's different opinions, sure. So anyway, thank you all of you for coming. I really appreciate it. I hope we'll see you at the next one. Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you for allowing the part.
You like that, Something
Yeah, we went to 8:30.
Yeah, it's only 8 o'clock.
Yeah, I don't.